The Gnome Who Spoke to Dragons. In the shadowed valleys of Thorburden, beneath the towering peaks of the Carolus Mountains, there lived a gnome named Zircon Sparkspitter. Unlike his kinfolk who preferred the safety of their workshops and forges, Zircon possessed an unusual fascination. He longed to communicate with dragons. Gnomes in Thorburden were renowned for their engineering prowess, but they had little interest in the creatures that soared above their mountain homes. However, whispers of ancient gnome-dragon alliances lingered like distant thunder, fueling Zircon's obsession. He spent countless hours studying dragonkind, their history, and their languages, an arduous task as dragons spoke in complex, magical tongues. Zircon was not a large gnome. Even among his diminutive race, he stood barely 3 feet tall. Yet, he possessed an outsized curiosity and determination that made him formidable. His eyes gleamed like polished emeralds beneath the glow of forge fires, and his fingers danced over parchments filled with draconic runes, as if he were playing an intricate tune. One fateful day, when Zircon was deep in study, an urgent messenger from King Duncan Draconia himself arrived. The king's summons commanded all able-bodied Thorbarden gnomes to aid the impending war against the dragon armies. Zircon's heart quickened. This could be his chance to prove the value of his unusual skills. At the royal audience chamber, King Duncan addressed the gathering. Gnomes of Thorbarden, our mountain kingdom has remained isolated from the world above too long. Now the dragon armies threaten to consume Kryn, and we cannot stand idly by. We shall forge weapons for our allies and build siege engines to topple the enemy's fortifications. Zircon stepped forward, his voice barely audible, yet filled with conviction. Your Majesty, I possess a unique skill that may prove invaluable in this war. I can communicate with dragons. A murmur rippled through the chamber as astonished gnomes turned to stare at Zircon. King Duncan regarded him skeptically, but saw the sincerity in his eyes. Very well, he said finally. Prove your worth, young Sparkspitter. Bring us news from the front lines, and perhaps you'll find a place among our allies. Zircon bowed low, determined to seize this opportunity. He would not let his people down. Meanwhile, high above Thorbarden, atop the craggy peak known as Dragon's Cauldron, a mighty gold dragon named Aethon surveyed his domain. For centuries, he had guarded these mountains, maintaining an uneasy peace with the gnomes below. But now, his ancient bonds were tested by the encroaching shadow of the dragon armies. Aethon was not like other dragons. He remembered the days when his ancestors had allied themselves with the gnomes, sharing knowledge and power alike. He wondered if such a bond could be forged again in these desperate times. But how to approach the isolationist gnomes? It seemed impossible until a tiny figure emerged from the clouds, approaching on gossamer wings, Zircon Sparkspitter, bearing a message from King Duncan himself. Greetings, Aethon, Zircon called out, his voice barely audible over the wind. I come bearing a proposal from our king. He wishes to forge an alliance between Thorbarden and dragonkind once more. Aethon listened intently as Zircon spoke of weapons and soldiers, but his mind dwelled on the gnome's presence alone. Here was one who dared brave the skies to speak with dragons, not out of desperation or fear, but from genuine curiosity. I have studied your kind long, Zircon confessed, and I believe together we can turn the tide against the dragon armies. Intrigued by this bold little being, Aethon agreed to meet King Duncan and discuss an alliance. Thus began a new era for Thorbarden, as gnomes emerged from their mountain haven to forge weapons for war, and more importantly, to reclaim ancient bonds with dragons. News of Zircon's audacious endeavor spread like wildfire among the dragon folk. When the blue dragon Malice, leader of the blue dragon army, learned of it, she sneered disdainfully. A gnome speaking to dragons? That'll be the day. Yet even as Malice scoffed, whispers reached her ears. Whispers of ancient alliances, of secrets hidden deep within Thorbarden's vaults. Her interest piqued. Malice dispatched her most cunning minion, a green dragon named Supprecious, to investigate and report back. Meanwhile, Zircon threw himself into his task with fervor. He delved into dusty tomes and ancient records, seeking any mention of gnome-dragon communication. His efforts bore fruit when he discovered an almost forgotten artifact, a crystal orb imbued with the power to interpret draconic speech. Word spread among Thorbarden's dragons that a gnome dared speak their language. Curiosity piqued, they began flying into the mountains at nightfall, drawn by whispers of this unprecedented event. Zircon welcomed them eagerly, using his crystal orb to converse and learn about their lives, thoughts, and grievances. News reached Malastrix Silverweb, the ancient blue dragon queen who led the blue dragon army against Thorbarden. Intrigued by reports of a gnome speaking Draconic, she dispatched a formidable agent, her youngest offspring, a young blue dragon named Skyblade. Skyblade descended upon Thorbarden like a bolt from the clear sky, his scales shimmering like sapphires under moonlight. Zircon greeted him nervously but with resolve. The dragon towered over the gnome, yet Zircon held his ground, activating a small device he'd crafted, a translator that converts spoken Draconic into comprehensible common tongue. "What is your purpose, little one?" Skyblade demanded, his voice echoing through the translator like distant thunder. Zircon swallowed hard but stood firm. "I wish to understand dragonkind better, great Skyblade, and perhaps, in time, to broker peace between our peoples." Skyblade laughed, a sound like grinding ice. "Peace? There can be no peace while my mother lives. She seeks only conquest and domination." Zircon nodded solemnly. "Then let us seek understanding first, and perhaps we shall find common ground upon which to build peace." Intrigued by the gnome's boldness and his clever device, Skyblade agreed to guide Zircon through the treacherous paths of Thorbarden, introducing him to several dragons who dwelled there. These ancient beasts were neither allies nor enemies of the dragon armies. They preferred to remain neutral, observing the world from their mountain lairs. Zircon spent months learning from these dragons, deciphering their languages, and gaining insights into their thoughts and motivations. He discovered that many dragons shared his desire for understanding among races, but felt disheartened by centuries of mistrust and fear. Zircon saw an opportunity here. If he could bridge this gap between dragons and other sentient races, perhaps they could unite against the dragon armies. Meanwhile, war raged across Ansalon. The dragon armies conquered one kingdom after another, their black, red, green, white, and blue dragons laying waste to cities and villages with fire, acid, frost, and lightning. Refugees flooded into Thorbarden, seeking sanctuary beneath its ancient mountains. Zircon heard tales of a young silver dragon named Lunar who had been enslaved by the red dragon army. Despite her protests that she wished no harm upon Kryn or its inhabitants, Lunar was forced to carry out atrocities against innocent people. Moved by her plight, Zircon vowed to help her escape and turn the tide of war. With permission from King Duncan, Zircon ventured into the hazardous lands beyond Thorbarden's safety. He journeyed through treacherous mountain paths until he reached the lair of Commander Toda, the red dragon leading Lunar's enslavement. Posing as a humble gnome seeking an audience with the great commander, Zircon was granted entrance. Toad lounged on a treasure hoard, piled high with stolen gold and gems. "What brings you here, little one?" he rumbled lazily. Zircon bowed low, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. "Great Commander Toda," he began nervously, "I bring news from the Thorbarden king regarding our war efforts against the dragon armies." As Zircon spoke, Lunar watched him from behind bars of enchanted iron. She could not believe her eyes. Here was a gnome who dared venture into enemy territory to free her. Hope kindled within her heart. Zircon's speech went well until Toda demanded details about Thorbarden's defenses. Unable to lie convincingly, Zircon stumbled over his words. Toad, sensing something amiss, roared and lunged at the gnome, but Lunar, seizing her chance, broke free from her prison with a deafening scream. Together, they fought their way through Toad's lair, destroying his hoard and driving him back with blasts of ice and lightning. With Lunar freed, Zircon led her back to Thorbarden, where she was welcomed as an ally. And not just any ally, but one who could fly. Word spread swiftly among the dragons that a gnome had freed Lunar from bondage. Many were skeptical at first, dismissing it as another rumor meant to sow discord among their ranks. But when they saw Lunar soaring high above Thorbarden, her scales glinting like silver under sunlight, they knew. The little gnome had done what no other creature dared attempt. Malice watched these developments with growing unease. She dispatched more spies to infiltrate Thorbarden, seeking information about Zircon's activities and perhaps even eliminate him if he proved too great a threat. One such spy was Supprecious, who returned to report that indeed, There existed an ancient alliance between gnomes and dragons. Moreover, she discovered several forgotten tunnels leading directly into the heart of Thorbarden itself. Mollis delighted at this revelation. Soon she would strike at the very core of their defenses. Yet even as Mollis prepared her assault, Zircon continued his efforts to forge understanding among races. He traveled far and wide, seeking out dragons in need and finding them aplenty. Many were enslaved or coerced into serving the dragon armies. Others had lost their way, seduced by power and glory offered by dark forces. Using his crystal orb and other devices he'd crafted, Zircon managed to liberate several dozen dragons from bondage. They joined him willingly, eager to fight against the tyranny of the dragon armies. Word spread among Kryn's inhabitants. A gnome spoke with dragons, freed them from servitude, and united them beneath a common banner. Skyblade watched these events unfold with growing admiration for Zircon's audacity and wisdom. He reported back to his mother, Malastrix, who sneered dismissively at first, but soon grew concerned about this gnome who dared defy her authority. "Find him," she commanded Skyblade coldly. "Bring me his head." But Skyblade hesitated, for he too had been swayed by Zircon's vision of unity among races. Instead of hunting the gnome, he warned Lunar and other freed dragons about Malastrix's decree. War raged on unabated. The dragon armies conquered more lands, their relentless march towards Thorbarden inexorable. Yet hope persisted in the hearts of those who had tasted freedom, thanks to Zircon Sparkspitter and his daring crusade. One day, while conferring with Lunar and other freed dragons, Zircon received news that made his blood run cold. Malastrix herself was descending upon Thorbarden, bent on annihilating the gnomes and their allies. Panic surged through him, but he knew there was no turning back now. "Rally our forces," he told Lunar urgently. "We must face her together and prove that we will not be cowed by fear or intimidation." Lunar nodded grimly. Together with several other freed dragons, they took to the skies, flying towards Malastrix's approaching army like a meteor shower streaking across the night sky. The battle for Thorbarden raged on through endless days and nights. Gnomes fought valiantly alongside their dragon allies, pouring forth from their mountain stronghold with weapons forged in ancient fires. But even their combined might could not stem the tide of Malastrix's wrath. Amidst the chaos, Zircon struggled to communicate with Lunar and other enslaved dragons. His crystal orb proved invaluable, allowing him to interpret their desperate pleas for freedom. Yet, despite his best efforts, many remained fearful or resentful towards him, and by extension, all non-dragon races. One fateful day, as Malastrix's forces breached Thorbarden's gates, Zircon found himself cornered in a narrow alleyway. Surrounded by enemy dragons, he activated his translator device one last time. "Great dragons," he called out, his voice trembling but resolute, "we have fought together, bled together, and died together. Let not our differences divide us further. Join me now, not as conquerors, but as allies seeking peace." A tense silence fell over the alleyway. Then, slowly, the enslaved dragons began to lower their weapons. One by one, they turned against their former masters, driven by Zircon's words and the memories of ancient alliances. Back in Dragon Cauldron, Aethon watched anxiously as Thorbarden's battle raged on below. He knew that even with gnome-forged weapons and siege engines, victory would not come easily. Yet hope burned bright within him. Perhaps this war could bring about change, true change, for dragonkind. Suddenly, a familiar figure approached him. Skyblade, his scales marred by battle scars, but his eyes alight with newfound determination. "Father," he said, "I have seen something remarkable today. A gnome who speaks to dragons and makes them listen." Aethon smiled softly. "You speak of Zircon Sparkspitter?" "Yes," Skyblade replied eagerly. "He has turned many once loyal dragons against our mother's army. We must help him, Father, before Malastrix realizes what's happening." Together, father and son hatched a daring plan to infiltrate the Red Dragon Army's ranks and liberate Lunar. They flew under cover of darkness, guided by Zircon's intelligence gathered during his journeys. Meanwhile, back in Thorbarden, Zircon worked tirelessly alongside other gnomes, forging weapons and crafting siege engines. He also continued his conversations with dragons, gaining insights into their motivations and grievances, insights he shared with King Duncan, who saw the value of such knowledge. News reached Malistrix Silverweb that her son Skyblade had consorted with the gnome Zircon Sparkspitter. Enraged by this betrayal, she dispatched Supprecious to capture or kill both traitors immediately. However, when Supprecious arrived at Thorbarden, he found only empty skies and whispered tales of a great battle fought far away. Intrigued by these whispers, Supprecious flew out into the night sky, determined to find Skyblade and uncover the truth behind rumors that Lunar had escaped Red Dragon slavery. Little did he know that Zircon, hidden aboard his own ship, would soon reveal himself once more, bearing news of a daring rescue and an alliance forged between Thorbarden's gnomes, its dragons, and other races united against the dragon armies. Back in Thorbarden, King Duncan summoned Zircon to his throne room. The young gnome entered, accompanied by Lunar, now freed from her enslavement thanks to Zircon's daring rescue mission. Behind them followed a delegation of representatives from various races, the dwarves of Throxaran, the humans and elves of Solace, even the Kender of Balafor. "We gather here today," King Duncan declared, "to forge an alliance unlike any other seen in Kryn's history. Together, we shall stand against the dragon armies and restore peace to our world." As one voice, the assembled delegates agreed. Zircon beamed with pride, his eyes shining brighter than polished emeralds. He had proven himself worthy. He had shown that understanding could bridge even the widest gulfs between races. Yet challenges still lay ahead. The dragon armies remained powerful forces, and unity among allies would be tested in battle's crucible. But Zircon knew something they did not. Dragons were not merely beasts to be feared or destroyed. They were sentient beings capable of love, hate, joy, sorrow, emotions not so different from those experienced by humans, elves, dwarves, and Kender. In the annals of Kryn's history, Zircon Sparkspitter would be remembered as the gnome who dared speak to dragons. His legacy lived on in the bonds forged between races during the War of the Lance, reminding all that understanding breeds friendship, and sometimes even love. And so, as dawn broke over Thorbarden one fateful morning, revealing a new day filled with hope and possibility, Zircon stood watch beside Lunar, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For he knew now that no mountain was too high, no bond too strong, when unity bound them together against the encroaching darkness, the end.